You know, this is one book I've heard quite a lot about, but never had to read in school. So why not go over it now? Where the Red Fern Grows was written by Wilson Rawls and published in 1961. Much of the book is based on Rawls' own childhood growing up in the Ozark Mountains in Oklahoma, so this would be considered autobiographical fiction. Autobiographical fiction merges the elements of real experiences and settings with fictional situations and characters. So, in a way, it's like historical fiction. Like I said earlier, I didn't have to read this in school. I know my brother and many of my friends did, but not me. I'm not entirely sure why, since it's a great story that would have fit well in my curriculum. Who knows? Maybe the teachers thought we could learn the same themes from other books. Anyways, the story begins in 1961. Billy Coleman rescues a red-bone hound from some neighborhood dogs and lets it come home to recover. He then sends the dog on his way and is reminded of a time in his youth when he had 2 little red-bone hounds while living in the Ozark Mountains. The story then cuts to 1911, where we now have a young Billy begging his parents for those 2 specific hounds to go hunt raccoons. He finds an ad in a magazine that some fishermen left behind and worked for 2 years to save up enough money for his grandfather to order the pups. Once they arrive in town, Billy walks the 20 miles to pick them up and take them back home. He names the dogs Old Dan and Little Ann after the 2 names he saw carved into a nearby tree on his way home. Billy trains the dogs to hunt with some help from his grandfather. It's time for the first real hunt. So, how this works is the dogs will chase the raccoon up a tree and Billy would cut down the tree so that the dogs could grab the raccoon. However, on this first night, the dogs chase the raccoon up a really tall sycamore. It takes Billy about 2 days to chop it down enough to the point where a windstorm blows it down. In time, Billy and his dogs are renowned as the best raccoon hunters in the Ozarks. Every raccoon hide Billy gets, he gives it to his grandfather to sell in his store. Well, one day the 2 Pritchard kids, Reuben and Rainey, want to bet Billy that his dogs can't catch the legendary ghost coon that has evaded their hound for a long time. Well, when Billy goes with his dogs to get the ghost coon, the dogs manage to get it up a tree. But Billy doesn't want to kill it since it's been around for so long. Well, Reuben and Rainey intend to kill it. Billy tries to stop them, but it leads to a brawl between Billy and Reuben. Reuben and Rainey's hound eventually appears since it had followed them here, and it gets into a fight with Old Dan and Little Ann. The brawl between the dogs gets quite brutal to the point where Reuben grabs Billy's axe and intends to kill Billy's dogs, but he falls on the blade and dies. Billy is troubled by what happened, but he doesn't regret sparing the ghost coon. Well, after all this, Billy's grandpa enters Billy into a championship raccoon hunt with other experienced hunters. Everything is going well for Billy and his dogs. Little Ann even wins the small beauty contest. Anyways, eventually they run into a harsh blizzard, but those dogs kept chasing those raccoons. With these last 3 raccoons, Billy wins the championship cup along with the prize money of $300, which was quite a lot back in those days. And you'd think that's where the story ends, but sadly, that isn't the case. Billy continues hunting long after winning the championship, but on one such hunt, they run into a mountain lion. Now, this lion tried to kill Billy, but Old Dan and Little Ann fought it to the bitter end. While they did manage to kill the lion, Old Dan was hurt pretty badly. He later died from his injuries. Little Ann died of grief soon afterwards. With all the money that Billy has gathered over the years from the hides and the winnings from the championship, his family is able to move to town and get Billy and his sisters an education. Before they leave, Billy finds a red fern growing in between the graves of Old Dan and Little Ann. Now I'll get to the significance of that in the analysis. The story ends with grown-up Billy saying that while he never did visit the Ozarks again, he has wanted to for a long time and wanted to see the graves of Old Dan and Little Ann, along with that red fern that is still growing there. Alright, let's analyze. First, I'll talk about the red fern. The reason why it's so significant is that the book mentions a legend that only an angel can plant the seeds of a red fern, thus making the ground it grows on sacred. There's a lot of references to God and other religious themes in this book. Billy's dad even says that he intended to leave Billy to help his grandfather with the store so he wouldn't be separated from his dogs, but since his dogs died, he believes that God took them away to keep the family together. There are other moments throughout the book that make it seem as if a higher power is at work, like Billy praying to get his dogs and the strength to go on when the going gets tough. It's really interesting to read. It'd make an interesting paper to go over if there really was a higher power at work here. Now, at the beginning of the book, Billy goes over how important memories can be. While some do hurt, they are necessary in helping us become who we are. Besides, we can never forget those who have done so much for us. Billy will never forget Old Dan and Little Ann. Also, there's a theme of determination and pressing forward. There were many moments throughout the story where Billy easily could have given up, but he kept going. He managed to work hard enough to get those dogs, and he did his best cutting down that sycamore tree. The dogs never gave up either. That's what amazed most people who saw them. The dogs were smart and they wouldn't give up as easily as any other dog. There was also an interesting use of foreshadowing. There's a superstition mentioned in the book that hearing two owls screeching at the same time means bad luck is coming. While that did happen during the championship and there was a little bit of bad luck, Billy still came out on top. However, I believe that the owls were foreshadowing what was going to happen to the dogs in the end. I also wanted to touch on the theme of family. Billy is really kind to his sisters. That's not something you see a lot of the time in stories featuring siblings. Yes, siblings do fight a lot, but there are also the siblings that become best friends. Also, Billy's family supported his desire to hunt raccoons with his dogs. They were also there for him when he needed them most. There's also themes of growing up and dealing with grief. Billy learned to work hard to the point where his dad considered him mature enough to help on the farm. But as we all learn, growing up isn't always pretty. We experience grief and pain as we grow up, but we have to learn to move on. It did take Billy some time to move on, but he did. He still misses those dogs, but he is still able to live his life. Overall, I would say this is a really good book. It's a bit slow and hard to understand sometimes due to the writing style, but it still tugs at your heartstrings. I'd recommend this for ages 12 and up. It gets a little graphic at times, and like I've said before, it tugs at the heartstrings. This book has been adapted into a couple of films, one in 1974 that eventually got a sequel in 1992, and another one in 2003. I haven't seen either of them, so I can't safely say for sure if they're any good, but if anyone in the comments has seen them, please let me know if they're any good. Where the Red Fern Grows is a good read, and I would strongly recommend it. I guarantee it will be difficult to read, but it is all worth it in the end. I hope all of you get to read it. Happy reading!